What's going on, guys, and welcome back. So we're going to change it up a little bit. I tried something yesterday. I'm not really sure how I felt about it, and it kind of showed. But today we're going to go over 4 decks for set championships and talk about them a little bit. And then tomorrow we'll bring you 4 more, and then Friday another 4, and then, well, Saturday I'm going to be busy playing, and Sunday same thing. So without further ado, first deck in the room, we are going to talk about the big dog from National Championships, the deck that had 6 out of 16 spots in. Is this still the deck to beat? Well, if you watched my video last week, I actually said Ruby Amethyst was the deck to beat, but I had this as the number 2 deck still, so nonetheless, either way, no matter how you look at it, any which way, up, down, left, right, backwards, inside out, this deck is insanely strong. And if I were to take it to set championships this weekend, I think this is the deck list that I would play given the way that the meta has been working towards. So essentially on turn 1, obviously you want to come out with an item, ideally Popsicle. Turn 2, you really want to hit your ramp, Tipo being the best option, followed by Sail the Azurite Sea, and then lastly the Visions of the Future. You could argue Sail the Azurite Sea can be better because you can, ink a card, play it, draw a card, ink a card, play a Popsicle, draw a card. So it can net you a little bit more advantage that way. Tipo is just kind of nice when you're running lower on uninkable cards because it can ink an uninkable card out of your hand, whereas Sail requires the card to be inkable. If for some reason you're unlucky and you don't have either one of those cards, Visions of the Future would be your plan C. If your opponent knows what deck you're on and they see that you play a Vision on turn 2, if they're smart, they're going to be aggressive because obviously your hand is not as ideal as it could be. To help curb verse those quicker decks and even into the mirror match, I have Sisu Daring Visitor on 3, which if you ramp on 2, that means you could pair it up with like a Popsicle as well on 3 if you have such one drop or such card, or more importantly, you ramp on 2, you can come out with Ice Block on 3 and then lower the attack of something and play the Sisu as well. Just kind of a nice little pairing there. Between the Ice Block, I think that it really does open up and enable a lot of plays with your Sisu. In Ruby Amethyst, it helps out the Flynn Rider right away. In a lot of your aggro matchups, it ensures that you can take out their threats like Piglet even, where they have more than 1 strength off the get-go. And you also have 4 Brawls on 3, so quite a few options there. On turn 1 to Vitalisphere, it's a card to not sleep on because the +2 and Rush is very strong. It helps you deal with locations as well. It makes your Maui swing for 8. That is nothing to sleep on, especially with Library. If we start to see Library seeing more play. Mirror matches, are they teching in McDuck Manor more? Possibly. I chose not to. Like I said, I went more with the Sisu because instead of the McDuck Manor, I don't want to lose to a Hiram being able to draw a whole bunch of cards. I want to be able to answer the Hiram pretty much every single time. I don't want Hiram to quest. I want to answer it right when it gets played. So it gets played, they draw 2 cards, and I answer it. That's how I want the Hiram plays to go. So between Brawl and Sisu, there is 6 options in the early going turns. Then when we get to our 4 drops, we start to go for more consistency in the form of Grammatala, obviously your Hiram, and then also the How Far I'll Go. This is one of my favorite cards in the entire Sapphire archetype. The consistency, the ramp, the knowledge. I just love everything about this card except for the fact that it's uninkable. But if it was inkable, this card would be absolutely broken. It's still insanely strong, even being uninkable. Turn 5, well, it's hard to say turn 5 with this deck. 5 cost. Just the 2 Mauis. At first I was going to play 3 and then just looking for space. This was one of the cards I felt that was the most knockdownable. We also have the Hideaway on turn 2, but you don't use it on 2 ever. It's an out for a location item, obviously, things like that. So in the mirror match, it helps tech versus those McDuck Manors versus Dwarf Mine. It helps get out the mine versus Ruby Amethyst. Obviously, those libraries can go away with this card very easily. Then we get into our 6. I'm playing Medusa. It's a card that really saw a lot less play, but I just think with where the format has kind of shifted a little bit after Nationals, I don't think people expect it as much in this deck, and especially paired with Ice Block, this card can still put in a lot of work, and I think the format is still slowing down, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Medusa start to make her way back into these decks, and I definitely think that it's a strong call. First glance, I'm like, ooh, Lady Tremaine, it's all the hype right now, right? But it's all the hype right now. People are going to be more aware of it and trying to potentially play around it or build to counter it. That's one of the cat and mouse games of when you have a major tournament and something is proven successful, people either copy it or they try to get ahead of it. There's two ways you can go about this. Do you copy? But when you copy, that means you're following. When you're following, you're always a step behind. If you cannot follow from the front. If you're following, you're always a step behind. So you got to try to find a way to get in front of the trends, try to predict the trend and to jump in front of it, to knock it out before it can get to you. And this is where it separates the very good players from the just average to good players, is how consistently are you right? How often are you right? Because you're not always going to be right. That's why we don't see the same exact players top every single event. But a handful of them, if you've noticed, they do tend to top pretty regularly. And that's because they are great players and they are great at predicting the event and trying to get ahead of the curve. And then a lot of us go look at their list and say, I'm going to do that too. But it's already too late because now you're following, you're not leading. That's just one way that I've always tried to look at formats. And again, it doesn't mean you're always going to be right. Don't get discouraged if you go to an event and you do really poorly. This is where testing is going to be insanely important. The more testing you can do leading up, the more knowledge you will have, the more insight you will have if something is going to work. And the less testing you do, well, that means your event is going to be your training grounds, pun intended there. And if your event is your training ground and it doesn't go well, that's it. That's your event. It already happened. If you have the time to put in the reps and to play and test, that could be your training ground. You can make adjustments and changes as needed, and then ideally do a little bit better at your actual event. But overall, I like Medusa, I think, moving into set championship format, and also 3 Maui half sharks on the 6 curve. Two Pirates Lives until aggro is proven to really slow down. I still think it's insanely strong between Purple Steel, Amethyst Emerald, and the Dwarven Mine decks. Those 3 are so fast. I think that a Pirate's Life really is a strong card to have, and plus it can help you close out games on your own. The big 3 we got, I'm going 3 Sisu, 3 Tamatoa, and 4 Maleficent Dragons. I'm prioritizing the removal in the form of Sisu and Maleficent over the questing and consistency power of Tamatoa getting those items back. I think that Tamatoa is very strong, but it opens up some weaknesses where Go-Go Tamago is one. Not that you should plan around that. Just if you're against Emerald, be aware of Go-Go Tamago. You can try to play around it. Don't just completely dictate your plays to it. That's just silly. But just be aware that that is something, especially when you have like a Tamatoa on board. But in addition to that, I just think that you have enough cards to get to that end game that by the time you want Tamatoa, you can usually see it at 3, and you don't truly need it to close out the game. So I think 3 Tamatoa is just correct. Like I said, the Maleficent Dragons, the Sisus are, in my opinion, more valuable, and Maleficent being inkable makes it easier to play at 4. Since we are playing so many high-cost uninkables and so many high-cost just blowout cards, 2 B preps. I was debating between 2 and 3, and at the end of the day, I'm like, looking at uninkable count, I believe we're at 16. Just real quick without actually going through it, I think it's at 16. That's the highest I wanted to go. I didn't want to go higher, and I'm like, okay, so what else could we take out? If I take out the Medusas, I can put in a 3rd B prep, but I'm like, I don't think that that's the right call. I think 2 B prep is plenty. And then Lucky Dime, I was like, do I play the Lucky Dime? Should we play the Lucky Dime? And I'm like, at the end of the day, I think especially because of Nationals, that Ruby Amethyst is going to see more play, and that's kind of crazy to think because it's already one of the highest played decks, and I think people are going to trend, and if they're going to play like Ed's list, which is teched hard for this matchup, Lucky Dime is a big way for you to help win versus that matchup because they have a hard time answering it, and it can get you that guaranteed lore. So because of the threat of Ruby Amethyst, I did think that Lucky Dime warranted that spot to be played, and this is my Sisu on Ice deck that I would take to a set championship. So, moving on to Ruby Amethyst Control. Slightly changed for those if you went on my Metafy and saw my 4 decks that I'm debating on, and my breakdown for is like a 3.5 hour long video. If not, that's all linked down below, but we're here to talk today about this kind of stuff. So I did change the list up a little bit, and that's just because of the trends and patterns because of nationals. Like, just naturally, major events can have small shifts on the format and what you should expect and how to prepare for future events. So I can't just not do content and not do anything and just sit here and twiddle my thumbs until nationals finishes, right? Though, like, we got to put stuff out, we got to discuss, and I think it's all still very valid information, great ideas, just slight tweaks. Overall, the list is actually very, very similar. I did go back to Broom instead of Diablo, which I've kind of talked the pros and cons between Broom and Diablo repeatedly, and just for where the format I think is at right now, I feel more comfortable with the Broom. I still think Diablo is a crazy good card, and if you want to play all 3 of the Drawing 1 cards, well, Ed did it. So Chernobog and Broom on 1. The 2s are the bread and butter. Snake, Flynn, you know, it's been pretty standard for like 4 sets, or 3 sets now, sorry, 4, 5, and 6, since set 4. Turn 3, we can say that now because we're not ramping. Turn 3, 3 ink. Fox, always going to be a 4 of. Sisu also is this, that power play applies pressure. This card is crazy in the mirror too, just threatening so much strength with that 4 willpower outside of another Sisu or something boosted by Crab or a Fox. It's going to be able to trade really well into your opponent. I wanted to play 3 Crabs, I really did. I just couldn't find space to cut out other things, and first and foremost, people maybe look at this and say, well, you can cut Genie. Ed did it, and he had very good reasoning. If you watched on Spessie's channel, he had an over hour-long interview with Ed, and he had great reasonings for the way he built the deck, for how it worked. I think, once again, that deck was built for that event, and not to say you have to play Genie. He absolutely showed us we don't have to play Genie. But overall, I still think Genie is a very strong card, and depending on how your local meta is built up, I think that it's a card that should be strongly considered being played. Green Steel Discard was something that was a lot of the time very, very favorable in my area, and this card is very strong into that matchup. So maybe that plays into why I would want to play Genie, whereas if you're expecting like all these Popsicle decks, maybe you don't play Genie and you tech closer into a list like Ed. So things to consider like that, like your local meta, the decks you expect to play against, how your area plays, because that's a big thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is they will see these big events and they will go look at the deck and then they will start playing it and they'll be like, man, I must be a terrible player. I took his list to my locals and I went 0-4. What decks did you play against though? Was it Popsicle? What happened? You know, like there's outside factors that can play into that, and that's why I always try and tell people, like, you got to build for your meta, for your event. If you're going to a DLC, different story. If you're going to your locals, different story. The 4-drop cards, though, like I said, it's kind of my bread and butter with them. The 4/4/2/2/4. That also includes the 5-drop Amethyst cards, by the way. Just float off the tongue way too easy. The advantage you can generate off Rabbit can be absolutely insane. If you're not playing Genie or you're cutting Genie down, absolutely you should bring Rabbit up because, just, again, the advantage it can generate. But overall, I think if you're playing Genie, that 2 Rabbit is still correct. Belle is another card that I was like, can we fit 3 Belle in here? Like, she just overperforms when I see her. But at the end of the day, I was like, okay, I can't really justify 3 or feel like a good spot to play the 3rd, so I'm going to leave her at 2. And then playing the 4 Elsas, 3 Maui's, just more rush characters, more into like those anti-Genie builds, more into just stuff like that. And then we also have 3 Lady Tremaines. I opted not to go for 4 because just playing slightly different. Again, with the Genies, my uninkable count's higher, so that's one concession I had to make. I was on 2/2 with Tremaine and Medusas, and I just got done talking about how great Medusa is, right? Medusa's so good. But I think Medusa's better in Popsicle, just like I think Half Shark is better in Popsicle. I would not consider playing Half Shark in Ruby Amethyst personally. Medusa, I would consider it. I still almost played one, but at the end of the day, I needed, like, I got to cut some cards, and I'd really like to cut an uninkable card. I'm like, Medusa can go. Medusa's a card that can go. The Lady Tremaine, Shift Tremaine bounce with Fox is just such a great turn 6-7 play. In addition, the threat of questing for 2, and I completely agree with Ed. Like, Lady Tremaine is just such an impressive card when paired up, like with the Sisus, the B preps, the draws off your rabbit. We're obviously not playing the library, so I can't go with that aspect of it. But overall, I was like, I think she's still very strong, but I just, like I said, I think that at least for my meta, his list wouldn't perform as well. There's a lot of Dwarf Mine decks that was one of his losses on day one, was Dwarf Mine. Just they can go under him very easily because he built his deck to go over the top of Popsicle and like have a crazy Popsicle matchup and be very good into that control-y aspect. So just certain things like that. The one big Sisu, again, really wanted to play 2, had to cut some uninkables, and it came down to 3rd Tremaine or 2nd big Sisu, and I opted to go for the 3rd Tremaine. 4 Brawls, 4 Friends, and the 3 B Preps. Overall, I think it's just a really solid deck, really consistent, really toolboxy, and there's a lot of things to consider and to test out and try now, especially because we just saw a very different build do very well at a major event. But if I was going to take Ruby Amethyst, this would be my updated list. Amethyst Emerald Tempo now. So if I were going to take Amethyst Emerald Tempo, it's like a cuckoo clock just going repeatedly, and that's not even what I meant to say, but it's going to go with it. Actually kind of fitting. I was going to say something that like just is recursive and going over, and I still can't even think of it. My brain is fried right now. Anyway, this is a deck I absolutely love. Definitely tilting into the aggro portion of it, going with a 60 character build as well, but still kind of keeping that tempo-esque in the form of things like Kit Cloud, Kicker, Lyle Tiberius, stuff like that to kind of help dictate your opponent and their play lines. So lots of 1-drops because a lot of the time you don't want to come back with a 2 on 2, you want to come back with 2 1s on 2. So like turn 1 you would come out with like Chernobog, Diablo, something like that. Then turn 2 come back with like Merfolk, Pegasus. Turn 3 Shift Pegasus even, give that Merfolk evasive. That's one idea. Or you just come out with that Merfolk on 1, apply that pressure, say answer my card or you're going to be in trouble, and then come back with 2 1-drops on 2 and just apply a ton of pressure to your opponent. Your 2-drop characters are more utility and less about playing them on 2. Your Snake is there to be able to bounce your Kit Cloud Kicker so you can reuse it, to bounce your Ursula so you can reuse her, to bounce your White Rose, to bounce your Goats, to bounce your Rabbits, to bounce these style cards. Even Belle is a great bounce target. Like there's a lot of really good bounce targets in this deck. So Snake really isn't a turn 2 play. It's just a low cost combo piece that you can play in addition to other cards once you hit that like 5-6 ink mark. Go-Go Tamago also is not really a 2-drop play. It's a 2-drop, but you pay 2, so it's more like a 4-drop, and he's more of a game closer. You have the aggro start, and there's first like 3 to 4 turns to get as much lore as you can. Then you have like that slight mid shift where you're going to have like roses and goats and try to close out the game that way. And if you still can't quite get there, you can crash something into a higher willpower character. Ideally put say like 3 on it, slap a Go-Go Tamago down, and get that 3 lore to win the game. Ursula is just kind of matchup specific, also helping you a lot into like the Steel Song matchup. Still trying to bounce characters to bounce and reuse your resources and to deal with your opponent's boards. That's where Fox and Crab come into play here. They're both great cards to help control the board state when the rest of your board is trying to win the game quickly. Rose, like I said, is there in a similar goat-esque fashion. Tinkerbell. I really like Tinkerbell because it just forces your opponent to have more answers to your evasive threats. If they answer your Genie, now they have to find a way to answer your Tinkerbell too, and it just forces them to run out of threats. Outside of something like B-Prep or Big Sisu, there's not a bunch of threats that you're going to have to worry about that are going to go wipe your wide board. Like, those are really the two big ones that you have to look out for. And if people start to copy Ed's list and they go away from the Genies and the Elsas, all of a sudden your Tinkerbells and your Genies are going to be that much more free to go after your opponent. I think that this deck has an insanely good matchup into Ed's Ruby Amethyst list. I would be very comfortable taking it into playing against him. Doesn't mean you're going to win, especially if it's against Ed, because he is an insanely smart player. But I think that deck for deck, you would have the advantage in that matchup. Doesn't mean you have the advantage against everything. Doesn't mean this is the best deck. Just in that specific scenario, I think that this deck would have the advantage in it. Kit and Lyle there to help disrupt your opponent, giving their characters reckless, bouncing them back to their hands. This is something I've been working with my son a ton because he's playing this color combination in more of an evasive deck, in the evasive threat, because it's just easier for him to pilot and to do without having to think everything through too much, but trying to really drive it into his head about how to effectively use Kit Cloud Kicker, because for the longest time he would just ink it all the time. But he's starting to see and make the connection on how strong Kit really is, because if your opponent can't play cards or answer your board, well, then you're going to win most games. Once again, that 4-4-2 lineup. And then also the Bell, just being able to bounce some damage around to take out opponents' threats. They get a couple characters with multiple damage. You can move it all onto one, stack it up, get rid of it. Your character has some damage. You can move it on over. She's a 4-4 body and quests for 2. She really checks all the boxes that we're looking for. And then the 3 Pegasus for the shift line. It's evasive. It's 3-3. It can grant evasive to everything else when shifted. Keep in mind something you can do that a lot of people forget, and it's something that Ed reminded them with his Lady Tremaines. You can just shift Big Pegasus onto Big Pegasus to continue giving your characters evasive multiple turns in a row. But overall, this was my Amber. Why do I keep saying Amber? It's because the Emerald is like twisting up with my Amethyst. Amethyst and Emerald is like and then Amber just word vomits out of my mouth. Amethyst Emerald tempo list. Like I said, this is definitely a very aggressive one, and it's actually about $150. So in the grand scheme, it's on the cheaper side. If you wanted to cut out the 4 Genies, that would be what, $68 roughly out of the $150 that you'd take off. I would put in 2 more rabbits, and I mean, shucks, you could really just throw whatever you want in there to fill out the void. 2 more Dolores or so. She's a multi-quester that draws, I don't know, fill in the blanks, but definitely 2 rabbits if you're not going to play the Genies for budget reasons. We got one more deck then for today, and this one is going to be everyone's favorite deck. Shout out Zan Saeed. Green Steel. Just making a few little notes on the side as we go. Another deck that can be a little aggressive in the early goings, help you go under decks while also then setting up the aggressive discard strategy to your opponent, using things like Muses in that mid game to control the board state. Lots of songs, lots of just advantage overall that this deck can generate. Some big differences between my list and Zan's list is I'm not playing the docks, and I would play the Sad Beasts from last format. I think that just the advantage this card draws is crazy. The pressure that this card puts is crazy, and if Medusa really is not seeing as much play, crazy. So I think that just Sad Beast is too strong not to play in this deck, and I think we kind of saw it, and once again kind of confirmed. I'm going to revert back to it because when you have insight from a very smart player, it's always good to learn. So I do highly suggest going and watching Spessie's interview with Ed, but he even talked about how this deck can kind of run out of resources and fall flat, and that's not really something that we saw it happen last format, and that's when they were playing the Sad Beast. So I already had this list together, and then hearing him say that kind of confirmed it, made me feel really good about the list because I had a very similar thought. If they answer like your Diablo shift line, or you don't set it up, or you don't see the dock at the right time, you can run out of resources really fast in that deck. And usually when you run out of resources, you're behind on the board state too, and then you're just into a really bad spot. This is one of the 2 decks I said to really watch out for set championships that I think is going to see a big resurgence. The 7 1-drop characters being the Merfolks and the Diablos. That's something we didn't see last format. It's just to speed it up, so the Merfolk's coming in there to help speed the deck up so you don't miss that 1-drop as much. You can apply pressure to Popsicle, which has a slightly better matchup than people realize into aggressive matchups. Not saying they're favored, I'm just saying it's not just an auto loss like some people like to pretend. In the 2-drop spot, the 2 Calhouns, because I think you should focus on either being aggressive or going for the discard, but it is kind of nice, and if you're into a aggro matchup, maybe you mulligan harder for that Calhoun. Ursula, Smee, just the utility there that we're going to be playing. Obviously on 3, this is where your heavy hitters are, your Diablos, your Prince John, and your Ursula. Double singer. You have 16 songs that she can sing. She is just going to put in some work. If you can get her to stick, you're going to be in a pretty good spot no matter which card you end up drawing. Prince John, obviously the ward, very strong. Getting the draws when they discard, very strong. Diablo pretty much forces an answer from your opponent, or you're going to get very far ahead on resources. I think the consistency of the deck is good enough and you draw enough that 3-peat is fine. I don't necessarily think that you need that 4th peat. That's my personal opinion there. Muses, lots of good songs here. She can also sing Zeus. That's another addition that I had. I just think Zeus is too strong not to play. Being able to take out like Maui, to take out Genies, Elsas, Bells. Like, it takes out so many threats without allowing your opponent to do anything about it. It takes out Rapunzels. It takes out Lawrence's. It takes out Pluto's. It takes out these cards so that your opponent can't slap a Rapunzel down and heal it to draw. It goes after locations really well too. Like, I think Zeus is just too strong not to play. Kind of like the Tragic Hero Beast. I think both these cards should make their way back into the list. And since we're putting them back into the list, we have to make concessions and cut out some other things. One, Hypnotize was one of those. It's not a song, so I felt like it was one of the more easy cards to cut. When we look at the deck as far as like the discard goes, I get it between Sudden Chill, Hypnotize, Ursula, Merfolk. We don't have as much discard as other formats have ran. Something you could consider if you wanted would be the Basil. I really, really like that card. I just think the cost curve is too high for the way the deck plays, so personally I wouldn't play it. The We Don't Talk About Bruno was absolutely a card I was really considering playing. Lucifer also was a card I considered playing as a one of, but Lucifer just being a 5-cost uninkable, it felt awkward on the curve line. We Don't Talk About Bruno. That was the last card I cut down to get to 60. It ended up going to 2 instead of 4. Then I'm at 62, and I'm like, okay, between Bruno and Zeus, which one's got to go? I'm like, 2 Bruno, 2 Zeus, 2 Bruno, 2 Zeus. Which one's got to go? And I just think Zeus has more utility into what I'm looking for, so that's why the Bruno ended up going. Keeping in mind your muses being able to bounce characters with 2 or less strength when you play songs. She can sing Zeus, kill something, bounce something, completely reset their tempo, and put you in a pretty good spot. The Chill, Storm, Strength, all really standard. And then I went for the Rapunzel song instead. And I did this because instead of giving resist 2 to something and drawing a card, or giving resist 2 to 2 things and drawing 2 cards, you just pick a character that can't challenge. So now all of a sudden that Maui Half Shark can't challenge. All of a sudden that, Robin Hood don't see much play, but Calhoun can't challenge. So I thought that this song was actually better. Overall, I think that both of them are incredibly strong, and there's not really a wrong answer. So whichever route you would like to go, I guess, is fine. But for me, I went with When Will My Life Begin over the I'm Still Here. Like I said, I think both are very good songs. Both net you a draw. Both are inkable. Both are 3 cost. Both are songs for Ursula. I just think stopping your opponent from challenging was better than the resist 2. The flip side of that is resist 2 you can give to your character, and then you can take your character and attack into one of theirs to deal with their threats. that way, especially if they're trying to quest out to win. So there is a little give and take, push and shove as to which one is truly better. And I think that they're both better in different scenarios. Which scenario do you depend or do you expect to be put into more often? So either way, whatever one you want to play, I just think that this is the route I would go. Again, these are four decks that if I were to play them, these are the lists that I would bring for set championships. I'll have 4 more decks for you guys tomorrow. Comment down below which decks you'd like to see, because maybe I'll make a last minute change for you guys. I already got the 4 decided, but if enough people pick the same ones, maybe I'll make some changes. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.